The exile. The twin sons of Kaeldar burned mercilessly overhead, their heat swallowing the desert plains in a haze of shimmering light. Dust clung to everything: clothing, skin, even breath. Yet for all its harshness, the settlement of the Kolen people had survived here for generations, bound together by tradition as unyielding as the stone that surrounded them. For Sira, those traditions had just stripped her of everything. Her mother's body lay on a pyre of dried wood and salt crystal reeds. The smoke rose in thin, bitter streams, curling against the pale sky. Sira stood barefoot in the dirt, her small hands clenched into trembling fists. She wanted to weep, to scream, but the eyes of the elders pinned her down like spears. Grief, they said, was weakness. Weakness was forbidden. Her line ends here, intoned Elder Vaith, his voice brittle with age yet sharp as obsidian. Without a protector, the child is a burden. The law of continuance forbids us to waste food and water on one who cannot repay the tribe. The gathered villagers murmured their assent, though some averted their eyes. None would stand for her. None would challenge the elders' decree. Sira's throat burned. I can work. I can learn. Mother taught me healing. The elder's hand cut the air like a blade. Silence. Your mother was strong. You are not. You are cast out. The word struck harder than any blow. Sira's knees buckled, and the sand bit into her skin as guards pulled her toward the settlement gates. Beyond lay only wasteland, a sea of jagged stone and poisonous shrubs, stalked by predators that even warriors feared. No one survived alone out there. That was the point. The gate slammed shut behind her. She stood trembling, clutching the leather satchel that had been thrust into her hands, half a loaf of stale bread, a cracked water skin. That was all the tribe spared for its unwanted. Her eyes turned back once, to the walls where she had grown up, to the life that had ended with her mother's last breath. The guards didn't meet her gaze. Then she walked into the desert. Hours passed. The sun scorched her skin raw, her feet blistering on the black stone. She drank sparingly, but the water skin emptied too soon. Hunger clawed at her belly. Thirst turned her tongue to sand. The desert swallowed sound, leaving her alone with the rasp of her own breathing. At night, the cold came swift and merciless. The stars spread wide and sharp above her, but their beauty offered no comfort. She curled in a hollow between rocks, shivering, her satchel clutched to her chest. Every noise, the skitter of claws, the rustle of scaled bodies, sent terror shivering down her spine. By the third day, her legs refused to carry her far. She stumbled, fell, rose again, only to fall once more. Her breaths came ragged, shallow. The world blurred. Her mother's voice whispered in memory, "Be strong, Sira. The world is cruel, but you must not let it break you." But Sira was breaking. She collapsed at the edge of a ravine, its cliffs jagged and sharp like teeth. The last of her strength bled out into the dirt. Her eyes fluttered shut as fever licked through her veins. "Mother," she whispered, "I'm coming." Darkness closed in, and then a shadow fell across her. Something large, moving, bending over her. Not one of the desert beasts. Too tall, too strange. She felt a touch against her arm, warm and firm, not clawed. A voice, deep and rough, speaking words she didn't know. She forced her eyes open for a moment. A figure loomed, skin pale compared to her people's copper hue, eyes sharp, clothes torn and strange. His face was grim, yet there was something in it she had never seen in the eyes of her kin when they looked at her. Concern. "Hang on, kid," the figure said in a tongue she barely understood, but the tone was unmistakable. Sira's lips parted, but no words came. The world tilted, and she slid into unconsciousness, the sound of his voice following her down into the dark. For the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't entirely alone. A fragile bond. Sira woke to warmth, not the searing heat of a desert sun, but something softer. She blinked against the haze of fever and found herself beneath a canopy of stitched fabric, shading her from the sky. The air smelled of smoke and something strange, savory. She turned her head. Nearby, the pale-skinned figure from before crouched over a small fire. He moved with practiced precision, turning flat pieces of metal and plastic into tools, coaxing the flames without wasting fuel. His clothes were tattered, patched together with strips of unfamiliar fabric. A strange device blinked faintly on his wrist. When he noticed her stirring, he offered a smile. "Hey, you alive? Good." She shrank back instinctively, clutching the thin blanket around her shoulders. Her people had always spoken of outsiders, deathwalders from distant stars, beings too dangerous to approach. Yet this one had not killed her while she was helpless. He extended a small container toward her, filled with clear water. His words were incomprehensible, but the gesture was obvious. Sira's cracked lips ached for a drink, but fear kept her still. What if it was poison? He waited patiently, then drank from the container himself, letting the water spill down his chin in exaggerated slowness. Only then did he offer it again. Her hand shook as she accepted it. The first sip burned her parched throat, and she coughed violently, but she couldn't stop. She drank until her stomach hurt, then lowered it, gasping. The man only nodded in satisfaction. "Better," he said softly, though she caught only the tone, not the words. He broke a square of dry, pale food in half and offered it. She sniffed it warily. It smelled unlike anything she knew, but not foul. Hunger won. She nibbled, and though the taste was bland, it filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt in days. The man returned to his work, fashioning a crude shelter from bent metal struts and canvas. His movements were deliberate, his hands scarred. Every so often, he glanced back at her, as if checking she hadn't vanished. Finally, he tapped his chest. "Daniel." The name meant nothing, but the rhythm of it stayed in her mind. He gestured to her in the same way. She hesitated, then whispered, "Sira." He repeated it, stumbling slightly on the sound, but his smile widened. That night, when the desert chill swept in, he draped his only blanket over her shoulders. He sat close to the fire, teeth gritted against the cold, while she huddled in warmth. Confusion twisted in her chest. Among her own people, no one had shared food or comfort with her after her mother died. Why would a stranger? Days passed. Her fever faded under Daniel's care, his strange medicines and steady patience nursing her back from the brink. They began to build words between them, trading gestures and sounds until simple meaning emerged. He showed her how to dig shallow pits and cover them with clear sheets from his wrecked vessel, gathering condensation as precious water. He demonstrated how to shape stone into edges sharp enough to cut. He taught her how to stay downwind of hunters and how to use fire to frighten them. In time, she guided him away from plants with sap that burned like acid, taught him to recognize the distant cries of sand stalkers, and showed him which lizards could be safely eaten. One evening, beneath the rising moons, she spoke haltingly of her exile. How her mother, a healer, had died suddenly. How the elders declared her unworthy and cast her into the wastes. Her voice cracked when she admitted the truth. She had expected to die. Daniel listened without interrupting. His gaze was steady, his jaw tight. At last he said, carefully, in the patchwork language they were building together, "Wrong. You? Strong. Stronger than them." Her eyes stung. She turned her face away, ashamed of the tears. Yet his words sank deep, a warmth she had thought gone forever. The bond between them grew, fragile but real. She was no longer only a cast-out child, and he was no longer just a stranded outsider. Together, in the merciless desert, there was something else, something stronger. When she curled beneath the blanket that night, listening to his steady breathing beside the fire, a thought came unbidden. Maybe I am not alone anymore. The return. The desert was never silent. It breathed with the shifting winds, the scrape of sand against stone, the distant calls of predators. Sira had grown used to its rhythms in the weeks with Daniel, but one night those rhythms broke. A low rumble carried across the dunes, too deep for wind. The ground trembled faintly. Daniel stiffened, his hand going to the jagged spear he'd fashioned from scrap metal and bone. "Big," he muttered, eyes scanning the darkness. Sira's breath caught. She knew that sound. Kerith, desert reapers, scaled beasts longer than 4 men. Their jaws could crush bone, their hides shrugged off arrows. Hunters never faced them alone. The rumble grew into a thunder of claws. A shape burst into the firelight, a monster of sinew and glistening scales, its eyes reflecting crimson. It lunged. Daniel moved first. He shoved Sira behind him and drove the spear upward, catching the beast in its shoulder. The creature shrieked, twisting violently. The spear tore free, leaving only a shallow wound. "Run!" Daniel barked, though his voice was half lost in the roar. But Sira did not run. Instinct screamed at her to flee, yet something else rooted her feet. The sight of Daniel, tiny against the massive predator, refusing to give ground. He hurled a flaming branch, forcing the Kerith to recoil, then used the moment to drag her toward the ravine. The beast pursued, jaws snapping shut so close she felt the wind of it. Daniel grabbed a pouch from his belt and flung it into the creature's path. The pouch exploded in a burst of smoke and sparks, scrap chemicals from his crashed vessel. The Kerith shrieked, confused, and retreated into the dark. Only when silence returned did Sira realize her legs were shaking. Daniel leaned against the rock, chest heaving. Blood dripped from a slash across his arm. You fought it," she whispered in awe. He managed a wry grin. "Had to. Otherwise, no more." She bound his wound with strips of cloth, hands trembling. For the first time, she saw how fragile he truly was. No thicker scales, no claws, no fangs. He bled like any creature, and yet he had stood between her and death without hesitation. That night, she did not sleep. She watched him instead, the firelight flickering over his weary face. Something had shifted inside her. The desert had taken her mother, her tribe, her future. But it had given her this human, stubborn, and reckless, who treated her life as if it mattered. Days later, Daniel admitted what she had already begun to fear. Their supplies were running thin. His rations were nearly gone, his tools breaking. Without medicine, his wound wrist infection. "We need more," he said grimly, pointing toward the distant horizon. "Your people." The words turned her stomach cold. She had sworn never to return, never to face the walls that had shut her out. But she saw the strain in his face, the weight in his steps. He had saved her more times than she could count. Could she do any less? So they went. The journey took 3 days. As the settlement stone walls rose in the distance, Sira's chest tightened. She remembered the jeers, the elders' cold eyes, the gates closing. Fear clawed at her, but Daniel's steady presence beside her kept her moving. When they arrived, shouts rose from the watchtowers. Guards descended, spears drawn. Sira flinched, but Daniel stood tall, lifting his empty hands to show peace. The elders came, their eyes widened at the sight of the exiled child alive, and wider still at the alien who stood protectively at her side. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Elder Vath's voice cracked like thunder. "You dare return, child, and with this, outsider, you defy the law." Sira's knees threatened to give way, but Daniel's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. She lifted her chin, forcing words through the fear. "He saved me," she said, her voice small at first, then growing stronger. "When you cast me out, he shared his food. When the desert tried to kill me, he fought for me. He gave me warmth when none of you would. He is more kin to me than any hay." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Young warriors glanced at one another uneasily. Even some of the elders shifted. Vath's eyes burned with fury. "Blasphemy! You will be punished," and the alien destroyed. The guard stepped forward. Sira froze, torn between terror and defiance. Daniel moved in front of her, weaponless but unyielding. For the first time, the people of Exiled saw an exiled child and a human stand together against their traditions. And something deep in the crowd began to stay. The choice. The standoff between Daniel and the elders hung heavy in the settlement square. Guards circled, spears raised, yet no one lunged. The people watched, whispering among themselves. For the first time in living memory, doubt cracked the unyielding stone of tradition. And then, the desert answered. A horn wailed from the outer wall. Warriors rushed to the gates, shouting in panic. Sira's blood went cold as she recognized the sound. Raiders, a rival clan, stronger and hungrier, had come. The attack came like a sandstorm. Raiders in spiked armor surged against the walls, scaling ladders, battering the gates with heavy rams. Their war cries split the air. Arrows rained down. But the defenders were scattered, unprepared. Inside, Elder Vaith roared, retreating toward the inner chambers. His voice carried command, but his feet carried him away from danger. The guards hesitated, torn between duty and fear. Daniel stepped forward. His voice cut through the chaos, rough but firm. Listen, you want to live? Fight smart, not hard. Follow me. The villagers stared, uncertain. But then he seized a torch, shoving it into a pile of dried brush stacked near the gate. The flames roared high, smoke curling into the sky. Fire drives them back, he barked, pointing toward the walls. Use it. Some obeyed. Others hesitated until Sira darted forward, grabbing a torch and lifting it high. Do as he says, she cried, her small voice fierce. He saved me. He can't save us. That broke the spell. Warriors seized torches, lighting bundles of reeds and hurling them over the walls. Raiders shrieked as fire licked at their climbing ropes, smoke blinding their advance. Daniel worked quickly, directing defenders to topple heavy stones at choke points, turning narrow alleys into traps. He showed them how to use boiling water from the wells, how to collapse ladders with ropes, how to funnel the enemy where they could be surrounded. Sira ran among the villagers, guiding children to safety, shouting warnings when attackers breached the gates. Fear gnawed at her, but adrenaline burned hotter. She was no longer the abandoned child crawling through the desert. She was part of the fight. The battle raged until the air choked with smoke and the ground ran slick with blood. But the tide shifted. The raiders faltered, their numbers breaking against fire, stone, and unexpected resistance. At last, with a final cry, they fled into the wasteland, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell over the ruined square. The villagers stood stunned, weapons still clutched, as if unable to believe they had survived. Daniel leaned against a wall, sweat and soot streaking his face. His arm bled anew, but his eyes were steady. He met Sira's gaze across the square, and in that look she saw pride, genuine, unguarded pride. The people began to murmur, not in anger, but in wonder. Words rippled. He led us. The aliens saved us. And the girl, she stood with him. Elder Vaith emerged at last, face pale with fury. Do not be deceived, he thundered. This was his doing. He brought danger here. But his words fell flat. Warriors who had fought and bled glanced at one another, then back at Daniel and Sira. No one moved to seize them. One of the younger hunters raised his spear in salute. Without them, we would be dead. Others echoed him, the sound rising like a storm. For the first time in her life, Sira felt the weight of the crowd shift toward her, not away. Daniel took her hand gently, speaking low so only she heard. I can fix the beacon now. Call my people. We can leave. But it's your choice. Her heart clenched. The village that had cast her out now looked at her with something like respect. Yet she remembered the cold of exile, the walls closing behind her, the hunger and fear. Respect born of desperation was not love. It was not safety. She turned to Daniel. He had given her food, warmth, protection. He had stood between her and death more times than she could count. He had called her strong when no one else would. Her decision came as naturally as breathing. Where you go, she said, her voice steady. I go. He nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. Together, they turned from the crowd, the first stars of night glimmering above them. Behind, the people whispered her name. Ahead, the desert stretched wide and dangerous. But for the first time, Sira felt no fear. She was not alone.